Welcome to the Wisconsin Podcast. I'm Craig Sauer. On this podcast, we talk Wisconsin things, everything from media, sports, culture, nature, politics, and more. On this week's podcast, I talked to two University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee professors who have collaborated, along with others, on a new show at the university's Manfred Olson Planetarium. The show, Indigenous Voices, Sharing the Wisconsin Sky, features the languages, star connections, traditional music, and cultural images from 6 Wisconsin nations: Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Ojibwe, Oneida, Potawatomi, and the Stockbridge-Munsee. The goals of the program are to share cultural aspects of Indigenous peoples, to preserve the perceptions of the sky, and to educate the public about Native American culture present today in the community. In this episode, I talked to Dr. Jean Creighton, the director of the planetarium, about the Indigenous Voices show, her career, and the challenge of communicating science to the public.
Figuring out what you can reasonably communicate and what might resonate with your audience is challenging and interesting.
But first, I talked to Dr. Bernard Perley, an associate professor of anthropology at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. He researches and advocates for Native language revitalization. I started by asking him about his involvement in the planetarium show.
I'm an associate professor of anthropology here at UW-M, and my role in this particular show is more of a consultant and a cheerleader, I guess you could say. One of the things that I'm excited about with this show is that it really does bring a large number of communities together, the UW-M community and different faculties, the students, but it also brings in, community members from the different Native communities here in Wisconsin. So in some ways, it's actually a great celebration of that kind of collaboration, across, multiple communities.
And this is kind of like your area of expertise, right? This, of language. Talk about some of the things that you teach here.
One of the things that I teach both in anthropology and American Indian Studies, and my particular focus is on Indigenous language revitalization. And one of the things that I do is I focus on best practices in terms of revitalizing languages. One of the things that is important to realize about language is that it ties in all our different experiences. And that's why this exercise, this project, Indigenous Voices, is so important, because what it does is it brings the sky and the earth and the community together. And so when you look at Indigenous languages, a lot of times nouns aren't just, symbols for objects. They're actually relationships. And when you see this show, you will see some of that aspect of language coming out.
Since I don't know a lot about the state of the native languages here in Wisconsin with the various tribes, where are we at? So are we losing some of those languages? What's kind of the state of where they're at?
That's one of the interesting things that came out of this project, is that it gave us, a lot of us, a perspective that we didn't have before. And we can see that some communities have lost a lot of their language. Others are revitalizing it. And so you have the whole gamut from a viable language that's used every day to languages that are trying to revitalize themselves using historical sources and other kinds of documents. So you've got that entire range. And you'll see in the program, it's less, for the communities that are trying to revitalize their languages, it's less about loss and more about the kind of catalyst for revitalization. And so that's what's exciting about this. You get both the celebration of languages that are still viable, but then you also see the kinds of encouragement that the students are getting in working on revitalizing their languages. So you get the whole range from viable to revitalization from documentary sources.
What are some ways that have you worked with some of the Native American nations in Wisconsin to work on this project here? How have they been involved?
It varies. Some of the students have become really engaged in the process. Others are, as I suggested or hinted at just a minute ago, really scrambling to find stories and words, and so they're doing the hard work of exploring their language themselves, whereas some of the other students, have a facility and have these resources. So it's been really interesting to see the kinds of conversations among the students in helping one another. And I think that's what's exciting about this project, is that it's bringing these students together so that they can share information and share different aspects of how they approach their respective languages.
So talk to me a little bit about how the actual program came together. What's kind of the goal with it from your standpoint?
From my standpoint, as more of a consultant rather than one of the featured speakers or community members, for me, I think that it's, again, the possibility of sharing what is so beautiful about native Wisconsin to all the citizens of Wisconsin. There's so much that the citizens of Wisconsin don't know about native Wisconsin, that if they just look around and, listen, then Wisconsin's history becomes so much richer. And I'll give you the example of here, Milwaukee is an Indian word. Wisconsin is an Indian word. Can we begin to explore where those words come from? Because this is about being native in Wisconsin. And the program is, sharing those kinds of insights. And so for me, it's being able to share native culture and language and history with the rest of Wisconsin.
Can you tell me a little bit about your background? You said you come from Canada. What's your background, and why is this an area of interest for you?
I come from Tobique First Nation in New Brunswick in Canada. It's one of the Wabanaki tribes. And Wabanaki comes from the Maliseet word Chquaban, which means the first light of dawn. So we're the people of the dawn. And when I was finishing my PhD in language revitalization, I was looking for jobs, and the Milwaukee job came up. And I started thinking, well, what would I be interested in Milwaukee? And this is the heart of the effigy mound culture. And, you go south, you go north, you go west, you're going to find all these amazing mounds, and hardly anybody knows about them. And so for me, I wanted to come here to learn more about, the effigy mound culture and visit these mounds. And it's striking for me when I'm teaching my classes in American Indian Studies. I ask, how many of you have been to the mounds? Nobody, hardly anybody has visited the mounds. This is part of Wisconsin's history. It's amazing and it's beautiful.
In some ways, this is a celebration of the cultures that we have in Wisconsin for the people who come from those cultures. But also, I imagine there's a certain amount of education that you want to do to people that, like you were saying, that don't know some of this history. What do you hope people take away that maybe don't have a relationship with these cultures? What do you hope they get out of it?
One of the things that I think is most important to get out of these kinds of programs, and this one in particular, I think it works across multiple communities. On the one hand, we just mentioned earlier how important it was for some of the students to start relearning their languages and to do the really fascinating work of, seeing how beautiful their cultures are. The other thing that's important for me is that other citizens of Wisconsin also recognize how beautiful those native cultures are, but also a deeper understanding of the history of Wisconsin. And I think that it doesn't mean that the history between the natives and non-natives in Wisconsin has always been happy. That's far from the case. But I think that we're at a moment where here we are in the 21st century that we can begin to celebrate the respective beauties of both cultures. It doesn't have to be one or the other. And I think that this show really goes a long way in setting up that kind of a conversation, that kind of mutual respect, but also a sharing of the kind of beautiful cultures and languages that are, part of Wisconsin.
Dr. Jean Creighton began teaching astronomy at UW-Milwaukee in 1999, and in 2007, she took over as director of UWM's Manfred Olson Planetarium. I talked to her about the Indigenous Voices show, as well as her efforts to educate and communicate astronomy to the public, including being selected by the Alan Ola Center for Communicating Science to be part of their week-long boot camp last summer. The boot camp trained scientists to better communicate research to the general public. Well, first of all, where did the idea for this show come from?
I think I might claim the idea. I like the idea that the planetarium has a cultural program once a year in the spring. And we've tried a few, and they've all been really interesting and successful. And I've always been interested, since I've been in Wisconsin, to know more about the Indigenous ways that people describe the sky. And that's not expertise that I have. As an astronomer, you typically don't learn about other cultures. It also, I guess, helps that I'm Greek. I grew up in Greece, so a lot of that mythology I really have at my fingertips. So if I wanted to broaden that range to incorporate other people's traditions, this is a great opportunity to do that. I also felt that I had a lot to learn about the Native communities of Wisconsin, and I was pretty confident that most people don't know very much about them either. So this was a way to put the planetarium in the service of the Indigenous people of Wisconsin. And also Bernie talked a lot about communities and sharing, and that's exactly where I'm at. How to put the planetarium in the service of other communities on campus, but also to engage and enlighten and inform people beyond the campus.
At the end of the day, you're kind of a science teacher, right? I mean, that's kind of what you do.
That's
you're an educator.
What I do, yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, what's the value in looking kind of backwards at Native American stories of how they describe the sky, versus like the current scientific research, which maybe what you would normally do? What kind of value is it for people to kind of take a look back and think about what Native Americans thought of the sky?
I think it's interesting that you use the word back. So I think it's useful to acknowledge the wisdom that people bring with them and the words that they used to describe and to bring some of the science out. For example, West, I can't unfortunately reproduce the word off the top of my head, but it means melting. It's a poetic term, but it was also an indication that people understood something about the rotation of the earth, the nature of day and night. I think that's compelling. That's beautiful to make it clear that people had information, had understanding. We have stories, of course, and they have their own beauty, but they hide also truth. So I think it's always relevant to marry the culture with the science. Also, for some people, to come to a planetarium may or may not feel interesting to them. But if you throw out a culture hook then they might look at the sky in a new way.
What's your favorite thing about this show in particular?
How much I've learned. I've worked closely with two of the faculty members, so Bernie, you just heard, and Margaret Newton as well, and a group of students who are in that quest of either putting out more information about their nation and their language or desperately trying to get to that. I really didn't know very much about this, so there was a steep learning curve for me, and I certainly have more to learn. But I feel like I now can ask good questions. I can help people frame what we're trying to do so that it can reach as many people as possible. One of the things I'm excited about this program is that it brings together, under the stars in the planetarium, a variety of people, including the Native American people who we want to hear because we don't hear enough of. We want to hear and engage people who are interested about the Native American understanding and traditions, and people now, and they're afraid to ask. So this is a way to welcome them in so they can engage with this new information. And also with all the people who love the planetarium, who are interested in the cosmos, and maybe haven't considered, let me see what other cultures do with this. So this really is opening the doors wide so that everybody can enjoy the stars together.
Would you like to see more collaboration between science, anthropology, theater, kind of this left brain, right brain mashup of programs? I mean, what value do you see in stuff like that?
Oh, I think it's compelling. I think it's really interesting to connect those things together, to bring the stars in everyday life. It's not just, I'm taking a science class, I learned something about the sun. This is something that connects to all aspects of life. I think we need to be more Renaissance people. The 21st century might be perfect for that.
You mentioned that you're Greek, and there's obviously Greek astronomers back in the day that kind of had their own stories. Did you find any connections between, those old stories and some of the stories that you're telling in the show?
I think one commonality is that the stories that people tell are a way to enjoy the sky, to look at it more closely, but also usually to explain something. How do you put the fissure, which is in Ojibwe, what the Big Dipper we normally describe as, and how he goes around, his tail goes around and around to get rid of the bad thunder spirits. And I think it's because the Big Dipper goes around and around the North Star. It's a way of looking at the sky and trying to make sense of it, try and explain things through a story, which is a great way to look up more carefully, but also to remember what's going on because you have the story in your mind.
Does that change the way you think about, educating and how to tell a science story today?
I'm working on it. My schooling was very formal, very dry. And PhD programs, you have other considerations in astrophysics. There's a lot of astronomy, a lot that we know about the cosmos right now to learn. When you are sharing that, though, with a broad audience, it is a lifeline sometimes to extend that cultural invitation. Then you can dress it up with more of the details that we have. And I don't want to say, I'm not dismissing the science that we do, because the science that we do is totally awesome and amazing. That's why I do what I do. But it can be a lot if you're new to the field or if you're interested in the cosmos, but you don't necessarily know a lot of physics. Where do you begin? So this is a way of kind of making you more curious. And then you can get more.
Thinking back to when you were younger, what made you curious about this field of study of wanting to get into this?
I wanted to know how the universe works. Yeah. So my mother says that we were walking down the street and I said to her, "Mommy, how are stars born?" I don't remember that. So it could be apocryphal, but my mother says that's what happened. So I've been interested in the idea that we can look at a distant star, we can squeeze all the information out of it and understand something about us and about how the universe works and about everything in between. And it comes back to, again, how our minds work, how we work. And I really think that's profound, that people not only are interested in those distant things, but have the capacity to figure it out.
So how did you get from a ponderous young girl to working in physics? What was the path for you?
There's only one touchstone, actually. I was interested in the cosmos from a little girl. I think it was at 9th grade. I went to a career counselor and said I'd like to become an astronomer. And she said, "Nope, you can't become an astronomer. Your eyesight isn't good enough." I think she was confused with an astronaut. But in any case, so then I thought, oh, well, there's nothing I could do about my eyesight. So I looked around what was the next best thing, and the next best thing was physics. So I pursued a career in physics. And then my 4th year, I was lucky enough that Voyager 2 was flying by Neptune. And I got very excited about that. I was at the University of Athens and we had an honors program. So I wrote a thesis and I thought, I wonder if I can get my hands on Neptune, which is what I did. And my supervisor said, "You don't need perfect vision to be an astronomer. They're blind astronomers, in fact." So then I didn't look back. I finished my degree there and I looked for opportunities for graduate work. I got a scholarship at St. Mary's in Halifax, which is not very far from New Brunswick. And then I carried on a PhD at the University of Waterloo in Ontario. And I did what we call a postdoc, so a postdoctoral research position at Caltech in California. And then I came to the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee.
So you started out doing a lot of research, right? That was kind of what you did originally. Mm-hmm. But when you came here, you became more of an educator?
Well, I was working on a satellite called WIRE at Caltech. And that had a catastrophic failure after it launched because because there was a power surge and the cup that was covering the super sensitive detector was ejected. So this got fried in the sun and basically the mission was over. So I could have stayed in California and joined another program, but my husband was already here at UWM. And I thought, well, maybe it's time to start a family. So they had a teaching load for me so I could teach astronomy classes here in labs. But then this opportunity at the planetarium came up. And the department said, look, if you could just be the intern director for a few months until we get somebody else, that would be really a great help. And I thought, oh, I don't want to do that. I mean, this is such another way far away step from my research that I was doing. But anyway, I said, okay, fine, I'll do it. And when I started doing programs, I realized, oh, this is the job for me. This is what I should be doing. So there were, of course, many applicants. And in the end, it was down to 3. And happily for me, the department chose me unanimously. So for the last 11 years, have been the director of the planetarium, and I have the best job on the planet as far as I'm concerned.
What was it that kind of just clicked? You said you were kind of apprehensive about it, but what was it that once you got into it, you were like, this is it?
My job inspires people. I can make grown-ups, little children, their eyes twinkle, and as do mine. But that's a marvelous thing, to come every day to work and say, I love what I do. Obviously, there are aspects of any job that you think, oh, I wish I didn't have to do that. But the vast majority of what I do is compelling. It's almost addictive. It's so much fun.
Why do you think you didn't know that before? Like, what was it that you just didn't know about yourself that you figured out later?
I care more about people than I do about stars. And I care a lot about stars. So I think that was when I finally quietly had to admit to myself that this brings me more joy, and the details of how a star form, that's really interesting and great. But there are other people who can do that, maybe even better than I can. But I'm a really good person to bring people together. I'm really good at building communities. So this planetarium, I think, has benefited from having me as its director.
Now, I know I think there's another planetarium in town, maybe a little bit bigger one in town. Why does this planetarium matter still?
Good question. I think there can't be too many planetariums. There are different flavors of planetarium. So the one downtown certainly is bigger, as you pointed out. They offer more programs, per day. So they have a machine, they have people, they can have 6 shows a day, 7 shows a day. A lot of those shows are pre-recorded. So they have little pieces where a person will kind of show you through the night sky. They also have, great movies that you can watch. This is a very different kind of planetarium. There are days that I do 3 shows a day or 4, but they're not that many, and they're all live programs. We have different productions usually 2 months. We have 2 new productions per semester. I employ university students who have a chance to use their talents for a variety of purposes, either to share the live night sky upstairs stargazing, or for production, to make animations, to make shows that we have. Some of them learn to present. Most of the school programs I do, most of the Friday night shows I do, but they do other programs for younger kids, or for birthday parties, for scout groups. So I think it's quite different. Plus, we are on a campus, so we can do these collaborations like this one. I can extend a hand. This production started more modestly. I had worked with Margaret before for a much smaller kind of program. We call them Astro Breaks. So we wanted to have some Native American stories highlighted. So she came in with Mike Zimmerman and some other people and did some of these programs. But after that experience, I realized, we need to do something bigger. So I've been planning this. To answer your very original question, I've been planning this for over a year now, almost a year and a half.
I saw that last summer you went to a boot camp with the Alan Alda Center for communicating science. I'm just kind of curious what you learned from that experience.
That was very intense. That was a very intense week, and that's saying something because some of my weeks are very intense. This was they had truly fine professionals, producers, they had television interviewers, really first-class people trying to coach us to get to a capstone, which is a 3-minute live television spot, which in the industry is considered, this is as good as it's going to get for most people in terms of outreach. And one of the things I learned was I'm pretty good, but there's room for improvement. I also learned that you have to match your message to the needs of your audience. You have to anticipate what is a reasonable message that you can deliver in the allotted time. And that's challenging. So I was trying to get across in 3 minutes how you can use a very particular kind of variable star called the Cepheid variables to figure out the distance ladder of the universe. This was probably too ambitious, but I challenged myself. So figuring out what you can reasonably communicate and what might resonate with your audience is challenging and interesting.
Last summer, there was also a big event. There was a total eclipse that stretched across much of the country. I don't know where you were for that. Did you get to see totality at all?
I made an executive decision that if the people get to see 87%, I will see 87%. So I was here in Milwaukee with more than 2,500 people on campus for the event.
Was it exciting for you to see the excitement of the public around an event like that could bring lots of people together at one moment?
Yes, it was. Again, this was another event that I had worked for over a year, maybe almost 2 years. I'd started to plan 2 years in advance. What was different was that we decided to make a play called The Sun's Disappearing Act, which involved another collaboration. Robin Mello is a professor in theater, and she helped with some of my staff to devise a play that my student staff, they acted it, they performed it. So that was an amazing experience in and of itself. But we also, in addition to promoting that, let's see. I'll just say this. We married science, culture, and history in that program. So this is a theme that recurs in my mind. In addition, of course, we had to prepare for the day itself and the glasses. I don't want to even hear about eclipse glasses for another few years anyway.
Must have been a lot of emails and yeah.
It was big. And worrying about the weather back and forth and the television programs and the interviews. I mean, it was all very exciting. The fact of the matter is that after it was done, I was relieved. It's like, it was so good. It was so successful. Thank you very much. Whew, let's breathe. Because it was intense. It was good. It was great. The next solar eclipse is in 2024. And I think for that one, I'll go to totality. I'll let my staff run the event.
It's definitely worth it. I went down to Missouri and it blew my mind, honestly. I didn't expect it to be as amazing as it was for me.
Everybody says it is an amazing experience, but I'm going to push back a little bit. I'm sure it was an amazing and truly amazing experience. Awesome. But I'll say that 87% was pretty awesome too. It's not going to be the same, but even that, putting in the hands of all those people the means to look at the sun and see an itty-bitty little sliver, because we can predict when the moon is going to come exactly between us and the sun, is something amazing. I mean, I'm hoping that it's going to spark the next generation of astronomers.
Did you learn anything about just about communicating and about the public, engaging the public through that experience, through that, doing all those interviews and responding to all those emails about the eclipse, and also just seeing everybody looking up on that day?
This was the first time that I was handled. So Robin, we had literally hundreds and hundreds of people on campus. We had these, we had I did 7 mini shows so that people can know in advance what they're going to see and what it means. So Robin handled me. So she said, we kind of did some rehearsing, some practicing, what needed to go, what needed to stay, how to keep it focused. She also protected me from very well-meaning people who wanted to tell me stuff, ask me questions when I've been talking for 4 hours. And she would just say, no, sorry, no, she can't talk to you. She has to drink water. She has to go to the bathroom, whatever, because she's doing another one in 10 minutes.
Yeah.
So I thought to myself, I really like that. I really like having a manager who's saying, that's good. No, that's no good. Try again. Okay. And we're friends. So she can do that and be totally honest. And, our friendship is not on the line.
Yeah. It sounds like a pretty intense couple weeks. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. As someone that aims to communicate science to the public and, engage the public, are you at all concerned about just kind of the world that we live in right now, as far as it seems like science has become like a political football and we're arguing about it in the public discourse, funding it, not funding it. And do you worry about that aspect of our culture right now?
I don't think it's an unhealthy conversation to have whether things should be funded or not. But I think it is unhealthy when people don't understand what's at stake. So the more information that we get out there to get the connections clear that this is what's at stake, I think the better. And I think sometimes we lose touch of where people are or what people know. One of the key pieces that Alan Alda's center is trying to make clear is that you need to relate to people before you can tell them anything, before they'll listen to you. You need to understand where they're coming from, what they bring to the table, and from there to build together. If you're just spouting stuff without any context or regard for who you're talking with, then you're not going to be very successful. The key part of communication is to meet people where they are.
Bringing this back around to the show, how do you hope that show humanizes the idea of science, the idea of astronomy? What do you hope that will do as far as engaging the public?
I think the key point is to look up and understand that no matter who you are, no matter where you came from, you and your people and everybody on this planet has looked up and wondered about the cosmos. And sometimes we story that, sometimes we use metaphors, but whatever it is that we're doing, we're awed by what's out there and how we're part of it and how to protect. I mean, you look at other exoplanets that we're finding, and the more we do that, the more we realize, boy, this planet is pretty special. Let's take care of it, at the very least.
Thanks to Jean and Bernard. It was a privilege to meet and talk to both of them. Indigenous Voices, Sharing the Wisconsin Sky, runs on Fridays through May 4th. You can learn more about the Manfred Olson Planetarium on their website. Make sure to subscribe to the Wisconsin Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Play. You can also stay in the loop about the pod by visiting wispod.com and following the show on Twitter at wispodcast and on Facebook at the Wisconsin Podcast. Cheers.